When I explain to people that schools, public schools, are actually responsible for creating impoverished areas and high crime areas, they look at me funny because traditional thought will have you believe that impoverished communities and violent communities create bad schools. Therefore, bad schools are the byproduct of bad neighborhoods, but that's not the case. Inner city schools are basically at a disadvantage compared to suburban schools and well-funded schools and white schools and schools that are in wealthier neighborhoods simply because they are underfunded. They're oftentimes unaccredited, and when a school becomes unaccredited, they receive more pressure by the state government, and they receive less funds, and that's because they're being punished for misappropriating the funds and budgets that they do receive, and you're pretty much not delivering on that. The majority of public schools everywhere teaches to a certain curriculum. It's all standardized test based, and the state governments provide budgets to these schools so that they can teach the kids to this standardized material. It's pretty much franchised, centralized learning. There is no room for creativity. There is no room for individualism. You have to teach these kids this exact syllabus, and that's pretty much the law for all public schools. But inner city schools have a hard time doing that because they're disadvantaged. First of all, like I said, they're underfunded, they're unaccredited, they don't have the materials that they need in order to help the students reinforce the material that they learn. They don't have extracurricular help and tutoring that a lot of wealthier school districts have. Um, and they're just, and oftentimes, physically speaking, the school buildings are dilapidated. They're old. They have you know uh, structural damage. They're physically and aesthetically unappealing, and they're just in bad shape. And when it comes to the teachers, which has been proven, teachers have been proven to be the number one resource that a school has. If a teacher is basically the most important tool that a school has in ensuring that a child passes, and they're the most important tool in a child failing. Inner city schools oftentimes have the worst teachers, and they have like a high turnover rate of teachers. Oftentimes these teachers come in on these annual contracts. They're only willing to work for 1 year, and then they're gone. They hope to gain that experience from the inner city school in that 1 year and use that to go off to work at a better school, or simply put in a couple of years at this inner city school so that they can go off and have that on their resume so that they could do something else. You know what I mean? So that they can become a lawyer, so they're teaching while they're going to law school, or so that they can get some sort of other position in another field, you know, and the teaching background, will further qualify them for that. The teachers in inner city schools are often young. They often attract first year teachers who are in their early 20s, typically 22, 23, and pretty much these young teachers are attracted to inner city school districts because it's easy for them to get employed due to the fact that there's not a lot of competition. Most of the well established older teachers who have a proven record of success in their teaching are at better schools. So, and plus, inner city schools have a hard time retaining teachers due to the fact that the majority of them are on this 1 year contract. So after their year is up, they're gone. Uh, and if you got a teacher who's in their early 20s, they have minimal life experience to the point where they don't have all the skills that they need in order to properly teach these students and reach these students who have these complex behavioral and personal issues. And it's easy for these teachers to subsequently get burnt out and lose inspiration and passion for the job, you know, especially if they're only using teaching as a springboard to move on to another career or to move on to a better school district. So you've got these young teachers who are only there under these yearly annual contracts. Once they get to these inner city schools, they realize that it's going to be a challenge. They realize that the kids have behavioral issues. They realize that the kids struggle to retain the information, and instead of trying their best to drum up some sort of passion to change things and to reach these kids, they simply become pessimistic and cynical, and they think to themselves, okay, all I've got to do is get through this 1 year and then I can move on and get away from this place. And as a result of that, in combination with being underfunded, being unaccredited, being in dilapidated buildings, not having access to the resources that they need to succeed, not having access to extracurricular after school resources that they need to further enforce the material that they learned. Now they're dealing with teachers who are only going to be there temporarily, so there's no opportunity for them to bond with these teachers on a personal basis. And these teachers are pretty much they're going to go through this pre-cut cookie cutter material, and if a child gets left behind, if they're having a hard time comprehending the material, they don't care. They just move on through the material, and if the kid fails, they put them in summer school and they just get passed along to the next grade, and they become the next grade's problem. The big issue is, since a lot of these school systems are doing away with these zero tolerance policies, and they're no longer trying to fail students. They're instituting these summer programs, and as long as a kid has perfect attendance, they'll be passed along to the next grade. And essentially, they're just kicking the can down the road and letting these children who are academically underdeveloped be the problem of the next grade. And eventually they're going to drop out. And as we all know, if you've got an uneducated kid who's left to their own devices in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood is already struggling with a lot of bad violence and gang culture and stuff like that, that school just essentially gave the gang another recruit. And these inner city school systems have a disproportionate level of discipline that suburban schools, well funded schools in better neighborhoods, and white schools generally don't have. For example, these zero tolerance policies, which these inner city schools are starting to do away with now that people are more knowledgeable about this stuff. But up until recently, within the last 2 or 3 years, they would suspend a student for wearing wearing a certain kind of haircut that they deemed against the dress code. So now that student is at home for a 2 week suspension and, lagging behind in schoolwork as a result of that. Or the student may uh, do something insignificant, although against the rules, like get caught saying a cuss word. Now they're going to be suspended for 2 weeks. Or the student is late to class a few times due to personal issues at home. They're going to get eventually suspended after so many warnings. Or if a kid does something like get into a verbal altercation or even into a little fight, they're going to be suspended. So, you know, in the white schools and in the well-funded schools in the better financial areas, they have policies in place to intervene in behavioral issues like this. If they notice that they have children who are fighting or not obeying the rules like they should, or displaying behavioral issues, they will intervene with holistic treatment. They will introduce these kids into programs that will help them understand why what they did was wrong. They'll put them into these programs that teach them how to recognize bad behavior in themselves, and it also teaches them to understand why they shouldn't do that again, and the wrong, and basically teach them the wrong that they did, to a point where they can grow from that situation, instead of just being punitively dealt with, punished. And in the better school systems, for example, if two kids get into a fight, they'll introduce them to a conflict mediation program and have the two students make up, talk to each other about their issues, and come out of the situation with new tools of conflict resolution. But in the inner city school system, they suspend them and let them roam their neighborhoods with absolutely nothing to do for a few weeks. So, yeah, so basically, these school systems are filled with these teachers who are very, very young, early 20s. They have absolutely no passion. They really don't want to be teachers, but because it's easy to become one, they opt to do that in order to have something good to put on their resume, so that they can use that as a springboard to get another job down the line. They don't hang around these inner city school systems for longer than a year. After their yearly contract is up, they go off to do something else. They come into these inner city school systems with no inspiration, with no passion to try to help these kids. Instead, they look at it like it is what it is. These kids are in the inner city, they're in the ghetto, they're not going to change. I'm just going to teach the curriculum. Whoever fails, fails. Whoever passes, passes. So they come into it with that attitude, and these schools, up until recently, were implementing these very harsh zero tolerance policies, where they would suspend kids for issues that better school districts would have holistic programs for and psychological help for, you know. And also, inner city schools have metal detectors typically, and they have a lot of police on campus, even at middle schools or junior high schools. Well funded schools, or white schools predominantly, don't have this. So you're already conditioning these kids to be in an institutional, jail like environment. And you're placing them in a situation where they're like inmates. So essentially, I just wanted to highlight this information because, the bottom line is these bad schools with bad teachers are producing ghettos in violent neighborhoods, not vice versa. Peace.